So let's go ahead and begin. We've got to start with the Spain that Antonio Margil de Jesus came from. Spain was made up of a group of kingdoms, and Antonio Margil de Jesus came from one of the parts of Spain where Castilian, what we call Spanish today, was actually not the first language of the majority of the population. The main language of Valencia, the home region that Margil de Jesus came from, is an offshoot of Catalan. So he was not a native Spanish speaker. He was a native Valencia speaker, and he was part of a society which still very much in the 17th century was dealing with the dual legacies of the Islamic and the Jewish presence. At the end of the 16th century, there were still communities that were identified as new Christians, either as having been formerly of Jewish extraction or formerly of Muslim extraction. To be a Christian in that environment meant that you were still dealing with people who were suspected of being not good Christians. So it was a Spain that was still very much in tension within itself. Politically, because it was made up of a number of kingdoms. Socially, because there were still various populations, some of which were suspected of being unorthodox, of being not true Christian. And of course, that was part of the European world. You have to remember that in the 17th century, we're at the tail end, but we're still in the midst of Europeans coming to grips with a Christian world that is no longer uniformly Catholic. Once the religious differences of the early 16th century turned into the problems of the wars of religions of the late 16th and 17th century, there were parts of Europe in which religious toleration was not condoned. There were other parts of Europe where there was a more accepting attitude. There were parts of Europe where, because of the Islamic presence of the Ottoman Empire, Christianity actually was a minority. So Europe was a mixed bag religiously. He came from a part of the world that was beginning to create norms that affected millions of people. And when you add that to the fact that it was a part of the world where what we now call science or natural philosophy was making the greatest strides, you begin to understand why Europe saw itself as the center of a worldwide civilization, why Europeans by the 17th century, by the time of Antonio Margil de Jesus, saw themselves as the representatives of man's highest achievement. So religiously, there's the monotheism of Christianity, which says that all men are saved through Christ. You add to that a civilization that over the previous few hundred years, from the beginning of the Renaissance through the late 17th century, had created revolutions in science and technology. You wind up with people who are willing to go out to the rest of the world and in very clear and uncertain terms want to run things. So that's the Europe that he represents.